Well, welcome back to Seek This Week. Every Thursday, we hold a town hall meeting. We're providing updates on federal, state, and district educational guidance, updates on mental health, education evaluations, transition planning, community issues, and other important educational issues that are important to families of children with a disability. Also, we try to answer as many questions as we can from our leaders that are child advocates and attorneys within our state that serve on our board. It's time for introductions. I'm Barbara DeStinti. I'm the president of SEEK. I'm the parent of a child with a disability, and I'm also a teacher.
Hi, I'm Julie Swanson. I'm a special education advocate, and I'm a parent of a young adult who has an autism spectrum disorder. And so he's gone through the whole special education system.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Forte. I'm a special education attorney. I also serve on SEEK's executive board as the secretary of SEEK, and my wife and I have a child on an IEP for dyslexia.
Hi, I'm Andy Feinstein. I'm a special ed lawyer in Mystic, Connecticut, SEEK's treasurer and legislative affairs chair. And I think I do have a child who has an IEP, but and teaching them at home is quite an adventure.
Hi, I'm Jen Laviano. I'm also an attorney. I'm in Sherman, Connecticut, and I am also the co-chair of COPA's Attorneys Committee. COPA is our national organization, and on the executive board of SEEK.
You can see the rest of our board of directors on our SEEK website. Our SEEK website is seekct.com. You will get to read their bios and read more about the rest of our board. I will say that Jerry Fleming, advocate extraordinaire, who's on our board, is going to be moderating the chat on Facebook. So if you have any questions, Jerry will chime in. So I want to tell you, your response so far to Seek This Week has really been extraordinary, and we appreciate it so much. And in fact, we are expanding our outreach and discussion efforts. And next week, in addition to Seek This Week, Thursday night, we're going to be presenting a roundtable discussion webinar on post-pandemic equity in education. That's going to be next Friday at 11:30. Webinar, we'll look for information about how you can sign on to that. And let me tell you already who has signed up for this webinar. This is our first guests include Connecticut's Commissioner of Education, Dr. Miguel Cardona, Tiffany Jackson, who's the Director of Student Services in New Haven, Ann Smith, Executive Director of African Caribbean American Parents of Children with Disabilities, and Sarah Egan from the State's Office of the Child Advocate. That's a pretty good lineup already. So that's all we have by Thursday at 7:05. So please look out for that. We're really, really excited about starting these webinars. We're hoping there's going to be a series of discussions about this topic. So I wanted to tell you our mission of SEEK. Our mission is to advocate, educate, and legislate for the 80,000 children in special education in Connecticut. We're also working on behalf of children with 504 plans and kids who should be identified but are not. You can find out more about SEEK at our website. Please consider signing up on our website just to let us know that you're out there. You can also get ongoing information from us. And a lot of the things that we post tonight and talk about, we will post on our website. I want to let you know also, we are a nonprofit organization. We are all volunteers here. So we do accept donations on our website, and because we do incur some operating costs in order to lobby in Hartford and increase our accessibility for our audience. So your donations go directly to those activities. In fact, because of donations we got from our Seek This Week audience recently, we are able to hire a Spanish translator for next week's Equity Roundtable discussion. So we're really excited about that. Again, please visit the website, seekct.com. So Jen, fill us in on, this is not legal advice. It's our disclaimer.
Yes, the caveat. Yes, so since several of us are attorneys, we need to make sure that we say that this is not legal advice, what we are doing tonight. We are trying to provide information to the community of parents of children with disabilities and the wider community of educators, but it is not legal advice. We also remind people that even if you post on the chat on Facebook, to remember it's still a public forum, and you may be inadvertently disclosing your child as one with a disability, which may be totally fine with you, but if it's not not, just give it some second thought. And also, we do ask that the questions that are posted there as well as sent to us are general, because we want to provide as much information to as many families as possible and not necessarily be focused on a very discrete, narrow case. So with that, Babs, back to you.
Well, I did want to say it's been a heck of a week. We got updates from the state. We got federal guidance. We've got a lot going on. So let's get right into it. And Andy, you are going to tell us first what happened with federal this week.
I guess the big news is that Secretary Betsy DeVos, in response to a mandate from the CARES Act, issued her report on possible waivers that would be appropriate under the IDEA. Shocking a lot of people. She recommended virtually no waivers. And so that was great news, and frankly, a result of a lot of letters and calls made by people out there. It really made a big difference. But the battle's not over. Speaker Pelosi is now working on legislation to provide substantial financial relief to cities and states. This is the COVID-5 bill, I think. There is an effort by the superintendents, by the National Association of State Special Ed Directors, by CASE, which is the National Organization of Local Special Ed Directors, and unfortunately by NEA, one of the unions, to insert a number of waivers of the IDEA into this legislation. We're doing what we can to guard against it. One of our concerns is not only that these temporary waivers may be the vehicles to try to get permanent waivers. The superintendents have for years fought against parents' rights to bring a due process action, and it's our fear that they're using this as a vehicle to change the underlying law. That's pretty much it on the federal level. We are supposed to be getting some topic briefs from the U.S. Department of Education. Those have not appeared as yet, and so whether that happens or not, we don't know. But we have a situation where the U.S. Department of Education doesn't want to issue anything directive to the states, and as Jen will tell you in a moment, our State Department of Education doesn't want to issue anything directive to local boards of education. Jen?
Yeah, and before I do that, Andy, do you want to talk about the one very, very good waiver for children in early intervention that was included in Secretary DeVos's?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, it's, the waiver is that kids in Part C, birth to 3 it's called in Connecticut, stay in that program until schools have a chance to evaluate and provide programming for the child in the special ed system, and those are for children whose 3rd birthdays occur during the period of closure. It may not be terribly relevant for us because the state already issued guidance to the same effect. But in any case, those kids are protected, and the level of services they're getting will continue.
Excellent. Thanks, Andy. So at the state level, so the State Department of Education has periodically issued guidance, and the federal government does as well, but our State Department of Education issues guidance to school districts. I want to say that guidance is not legislation. It is not, quote unquote, the law. It is meant to be guidance. That said, we want you to know 2 things before we get into the details of what the guidance was that came out on April 24th. First, that we feel at SEEK that the state should be issuing directives rather than guidance to school districts on a number of areas, and we've made that very clear to them. We're proud to partner with the State Department of Education and collaborate with them even when we don't agree. And the other thing that's important for you to know is even though this is not the law, quote unquote, guidance, it is very important when it comes out, because when school districts follow the state's guidance, it is very, very difficult to overcome that. And the presumption is that they have a safe harbor if they have followed that guidance. And so we are very active at SEEK in making sure we have a say in the guidance and respond to the guidance because of the fact that it is something that school districts rely upon in their decision making. We are very, very excited to go through with you the details of what that guidance have. There's a lot that's missing versus what's in there, and we're going to go through that as well. But we have both the guidance as well as SEEK's response to the state, which we sent on the 28th, listed on the school closure page of our website, which again is seekct.com. So I think Andy's up to talk a little bit about the first aspect of the guidance and our response to it.
That's
And
correct.
First slide, Jeff. That's the introductory slide. Next one. Okay. What is FAPE? FAPE is obviously a free and appropriate public education. As a functional term, FAPE is defined for each child by what's in the IEP. The state guidance does not so define FAPE and does not really address what kind of standard there is for school closure. What we think should happen, this is not what's in the guidance, but this is what we think should happen, is that we consider what's in the IEP to be FAPE, that services, there's some services that obviously cannot be delivered in a distance learning environment. The burden ought to be on the school to explain the impossibility of some services, and to the extent that there aren't services provided, the school district would not be liable for not producing a FAPE during that period, subject obviously to what may come later. But right now, the State Department of Education seems to be embracing what I like to call a FAPE light standard, which is whatever the school district feels like providing is good enough. That's not what the law says. That's not what most states provide, and that I consider the central defect in this guidance. Jen.
Okay. Jeff, you got the next one? Okay. So as you can see, the way we set up, and Jeff was very, very kind enough to put together this PowerPoint for us, is on the left, you have on your screen what the guidance says, and on the right, you have what SEEK is responding to and what we believe should be the case. So just so you have a sense of what these two symbols mean on these slides. So PPT meetings. This has been something, we're very proud at SEEK that when we had the bureau chief on here as a guest, and we were very grateful that he joined us a couple of weeks ago, that when he came on, he was crystal clear that school districts should not have a blanket policy of refusing PPTs during school closure, which we were hearing boots on the ground was happening all of the time. In fact, many of you posted questions on our Seek This Week saying you had been told that there will not be any PPTs during the school closure, even though virtual and telephonic PPTs are something that even the IDEA contemplates. And so after that, we let him know that it was appreciated, but we were still hearing these kind of blanket refusals. And so the good news about the state guidance is that it very explicitly says a district should not adopt any policy or practice that results in the cancellation of all PPT meetings. That is fantastic news, because so many parents have been so anxious about what's going to happen for the rest of the school year, planning for extended school year, and planning for next school year, because this is the time of year where we typically do it. So we're very happy about that. That was good news, and we're grateful for that, and we let him know that we are grateful for that. In Connecticut, PPT should occur in all school districts, and we don't think that the response of we're just not holding them is really legally acceptable any longer. I have myself already started attending virtual PPTs, and they've been going fairly well, but it is something that unfortunately parents are still having to push back. Just a couple of days ago, I heard from a parent that they were told absolutely not, we're not holding any of them during the school closure. The guidance from the state repeatedly encourages planning outside of the PPT process through IEP amendments. An IEP amendment is where the parents and the district agree to sign a document that changes the IEP that was agreed upon in the PPT meeting. And those are, a very reasonable tool, but as we've stated, that's not something that we feel should be the go-to even during the school closure, because it doesn't allow for discussion. It doesn't allow for the parents to be participating in those conversations and having their questions answered. And in our view, it's not going to result in a meaningful IEP. There are certain circumstances where an IEP amendment is great, but we think that should not be the default position. We feel strongly that PPT should be addressing annual planning, so those annual reviews that occur, extended school year eligibility, as well as to talk about the present levels of functional and academic performance for students, because we know that for many of our learners, those present levels of performance that were in place when school ended in March may not be the current levels of performance. There may be progress and there may be regression. The state guidance also, in our view, lacks guidance for PPT annual reviews and extended school year planning. The state has said that they will be issuing separate guidance on extended school year, and we do expect that the governor will be issuing some kind of an announcement about whether May 20th remains the date of closure period, or if we're going to have another extension. And we expect that around that time we'll hear from the state about extended school year services. And we feel very strongly that at SEEK that part of the reason to have the PPT process is to address lost skills. The Bureau and its guidance, and this is not the first time they've said that, have essentially said that what is happening now for our students in terms of the distance learning is not appropriate conversation for PPT meetings. We strongly and vehemently disagree. We feel that information that families and educators are getting about students during this period of closure is actually very helpful information and may well inform both future programming if we're still closed, as well as programming when school reopens. So that's that slide.
Thanks, Jen. So I'm going to go through the question that the state still hasn't answered, and that we disagree with the direction that they've provided so far, and that is, are these in fact school days, all right, that are occurring? So the state guidance is that this school closure time period actually does not count as a school day, okay? Instead, it's being defined as a continued educational opportunity, all right? So that's not really addressing, now that we're, 7 weeks into school closures, it's not addressing what are the school closures for the months and for the weeks and the months ahead. We're still operating in what the state is providing the guidance in as a continued educational opportunity, rather than it actually counting as an actual school day. So that's on the state side. The position that we at SEEK are taking is that we reject the position that the days of distance learning are not counting as a school day. We want them to be counted as a school day. And the evidence and the reasons that we have to support why our distance learning should be counted as a school day is because we're now getting new guidance last week that is coming out, in which students are now being graded in a certain way, and attendance is being counted for in a certain way. So when you have grading and attendance for a distance learning day, it begs the question, well, is it really a school day if we're now issuing guidance on grading and attendance? And if grading and attendance is being issued for regular education students, but we're still counting the distance learning not as a school day, it is inherently discriminatory towards special education students. There are still questions that are left if we were to concede and define it as a distance learning day. For example, does it toll the statute of limitations in which a parent can bring a denial of faith claim? Okay, if it's not counting as a school day, arguably the statute of limitation is told, meaning that the time frame is stopped and a client's or a family's claim can be preserved beyond what would be the typical time frame in which a parent could bring a cause of action. Also, during this proposed interim placement, what are the parents' fundamental rights to challenge or to question the proposed interim plan? Okay, it's not yet being memorialized in any type of IEP type of language, okay? And lastly, an at-home special education service, our position is it qualifies as a change in placement. So the moment that the schools closed and we entered into this continued educational opportunity, that constituted a change in placement, okay? And the stay put placement technically is the last IEP placement that the child was at before we went into the continued educational opportunity position, okay? So throughout this, we do know, though, from federal Department of Ed guidance, that school districts are required to implement a child's IEP, service hours, and related services as identified in the child's IEP, pursuant to the IDA to the greatest extent possible. So we still have issue with whether or not this should be counted as a continued educational opportunity, or if it should be defined as a school day. We take the position that it's now starting to sound, look, and feel like a school day because of the grading guidance, because of the attendance guidance, and therefore we should be counting them as such. Andy, I believe you're next, right?
Right. So let's simplify this. At the very least, schools should be writing down what program, what services is being provided during this period of closure. The State Department of Education has provided no guidance on that, is requiring no documentation. There's no clarity on services to be provided. Incidentally, the state is asking districts, not requiring them, asking districts to provide data on student engagement, on how many students are engaged in the process. The data that's being produced is not very credible. Hartford, for example, said that something over 90% of their students are engaged, which we know is not a fact. But in terms of what services are actually being provided, there is no requirement for data. Our proposal was perhaps we should have a new, what's known as page 11 of the IEP, which is the service grid, that's called an interim IEP for periods of school closure, that would list with some precision the services to be provided. That if that document could be sent to parents and for their agreement, and if they disagreed, the parents would have a right to a PPT and a right to challenge it thereafter. That seems to be consistent with the law. The guidance from the state is not consistent with the law in that regard. Julie, talk about ESY.
Can I just interrupt before you get to ESY? The other thing on the point on distance learning documentation that we've made, and I think it's important, is there is a lot of reliable speculation that we may end up with a second wave of this virus, even if school opens in the fall. And we feel that it's just prudent to plan for sort of a plan B. What is our plan B if we end up in another school closure? And by documenting the distance learning programming now, we will know what that looks like for the future.
And
In that regard, it is probably worthwhile, if you're going to PPT, to ask to have two service grids, one for an in-school program and one for a distance learning program going forward. Because as Jen said, the public health officials are suggesting that we're going to have another very serious outbreak next fall and early winter. And if that's the case, we're going to go back to distance learning, and we might as well get it written down what services the students being provided.
We have a sample grid that we were going to provide parents.
Not yet, but I think we can develop one.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt
Jeff,
you.
were you going to say something before I talk about extended school year?
yeah, Julie, thanks. Just to really kind of unbundle really quick what this addendum page would look like, okay? What we're asking the state to do is to come up with an additional page to your child's traditional IEP that would simply set forth the number of hours that your child would be receiving during a school closure period versus the number of hours and services that your child would be receiving during the traditional physical school day. And for PPTs teams that are not allowing you to do that, you should be requesting your school team to provide you with this. As Jen mentioned, right, the news is that we're going to be having a second wave of this. And right now, there is not any guidance that the state has issued to literally have what are the service hours on your child's IEP versus what are the service hours during the distance learning documentation. And that's what we're proposing. We're inviting the state to be a collaborative member to develop that. And we certainly have some ideas. So go ahead, Julie.
You know, I just want to add that I think, you know, I think we should all continue to be sensitive that people in school districts who work for schools may be impacted by coronavirus, family members could be impacted. We understand all of these things, but I think to everybody's point that we're trying to say here is if there is some reason that is legitimate that you cannot provide as close to the current IEP as if school were in session physically at a school location to the maximum extent possible, at least you've asked why, and there's some explanation of why. And there's a documentation of what you are getting. So having said that, let me jump to extended school year, Jeff, if you don't mind changing the, okay, great, thank you. You know, this happens to be one of the more popular topics that people are asking about, and it's understandably so. Why? You know, some extended school year services are right around the corner. We are nearing the end of the school year. Now, let me just say extended school year services are very different from summer school, which is provided to students who are in regular education, okay? Extended school year service, by the very definition of it under the IDEA, the question that is begged is, does this student who has an IEP require extended school year services, right? That the IEP goals and objectives, all of them or some of them, need to be continued over the summer months in order to receive a free, appropriate public education, okay? That's the question that has to be asked under normal circumstances when kids are in school. Our position is, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself because I'm riffing off the slide here. So let me go back to the slide. I'm going to come back to this. The state is saying right now there is no guidance issued yet on extended school year services. And we are very much hoping that the state issues guidance on this ASAP, because this is right around the corner and we don't think this is anything that should be put off for the last minute. So that's number one. The state is also saying that we may not need PPTs to discuss extended school year services. Okay, we disagree with that, but I'll go into that. And the state's guidance does not address the fact that extended school year services can happen over distance learning. I mean, let's face it, we don't even know if there's going to be extended school year physically in schools, or perhaps it's going to be distance learning, but we believe we have to address all of these things. So let's go over to the slide where what we at SEEK believe. As I said, we are hoping that the state is able to issue guidance on extended school year as soon as is possible, because it is looming very quickly upon us. We also very firmly believe that you should be requesting a PPT to discuss extended school year services. We don't believe that these are issues that should be discussed off the record, so to speak. Look, you know, when you look at whether or not you require extended school year services, does the child will the child receive a FAPE without them? Okay. And the fact of the matter is, this is individualized to every single child's IEP right now, but we firmly believe that every student who is receiving special education services at this juncture should be eligible for extended school year services so the remediation efforts can begin. And we understand that that's not something that the state has said, but that's our position. We believe that there should be an exception made during what has been an exceptional time.
And Julie, can I just jump in before we move off your slide on that? I'm the great interrupter today, apparently, tonight.
That's all right.
What I wanted to say is that suggestion that SEEK has provided to the state that all students who have IEPs should be deemed eligible for ESY is for ESY 2020. We're not saying or advocating that all kids who have IEPs should forever be entitled to or eligible for extended school year services. But given that school may be closed for 6 months, we know, and the state has acknowledged many times, that the school closures disproportionately impact students with disabilities. And we feel this is a good first step to make sure that we start the 2020-2021 school year in as good a position as we can be.
And thanks. And I'll just add one more thing. You know, it's not uncommon when teams are discussing extended school year services that services are sort of cut in half. So let's say you had 4 half-hour sessions of speech a week. The team may say, well, we're only going to give you a half an hour, and so on and so forth with other services. And I think that's another really important reason to discuss extended school year in a PPT, because it may very well be deemed, for what has been these exceptional circumstances, that you shouldn't be cutting in half what the services are, which at this juncture could even be, you know, less than what you would have been getting in school anyway. So there's lots of reasons that we believe that extended school year services should be discussed through the PPT process. Does anybody else have anything to say about that? Okie dokie.
Okay.
And who's next? I believe
This
it's
is me.
Okay.
This is me. So one of the things that we've also provided to the state, and we've talked a lot about, is having some guidelines for these virtual and telephonic PPT meetings. The state has certainly addressed this and has had some concerns about discussions that occur outside of the PPT process. There are some lingering concerns that the state has issued many times that we frankly are not sure we understand about confidentiality. We do understand that what normally happens in PPT meetings is that there's a closed door and people are not invited into that room because you're talking about a student and they have rights to privacy and what their educational records are, and in those conversations we understand that. But the concern seems to be lopsided in that rather than being concerned about the student's confidentiality, a lot of the conversation and the guidance seems to be focused on confidentiality of the educators, which is perplexing to us. We certainly want and encourage parents to be respectful of the fact that everyone's working from home, and when you have these meetings, it's going to be uncomfortable for everybody, and we're all going to have to understand if the dog walks in the room or your kid walks in the room and all of those things. But one of the things the state does is it encourages exchange of documents 3 days in advance of PPT. We think that's wise. We have some other input on that at SEEK, one of which is in Connecticut, we have a long tradition and even cases on this that say that parents have a right to record their IEPT meetings, provided, of course, they let the school district know that they're doing that. We're not suggesting anyone record surreptitiously, but we do have that right. And we think this time it is probably more important than ever to be able to maintain that right, because parents and educators are under so much strain right now. We know from a number of reports that are coming out that people's memories are not what they normally are, that a parent's ability to meaningfully participate in a PPT meeting may be somewhat reduced, and or they may not remember the conversation because of the level of strain everybody is under. And so we want to make sure that parents can look back, or if they have one of the parents is an essential worker and they cannot participate in the meeting, or one parent is watching the children or assisting in the distance learning while the other parent is there. There are many, many reasons that it would be important for the parent to be able to go back later and listen to what happened in the meeting and make sure that they have a handle on what was decided. We want to make sure that parents have a right to draft goals and objectives and review evaluations in writing in advance of the PPT. We do believe that extended school year and annual reviews should be discussed. We've also, I certainly have, and I'm sure my colleagues as well, have talked about things that are just good practice during virtual and telephonic PPT. So obviously things like finding a quiet space are important, but so are things like perhaps having robust email communication in advance of the PPT, particularly around highly sensitive topics. When parents attend PPT meetings, particularly for younger children, they and the team often discuss some very difficult things about the child's disability or behavior that particularly with young children, parents wouldn't necessarily want to hear, want to have their child overhear their input as well as the team's. And in order for the conversations to be candid and for decisions to be made with as much information as possible, we're encouraging that if your child's IEP requires some difficult discussion about your child that you would be very upset if they overheard, that maybe you start a conversation in advance of that PPT to get out of the way the input of you and the team on those topics, because your child is likely to be in your home when you have that meeting.
You know, I just wanted to add something to that slide here, Jen. And the big takeaway in this guidance that parents should really know, if you don't, okay, is that if you ask your school team for your child's draft goals and objectives and draft evaluations and assessments in writing 3 days in advance of your PPT, the district is obligated to provide it to you. And so for parents that don't know that, it's a big takeaway that you should know, because you don't want to go into a PPT meeting without reviewing what the district has prepared in advance of the meeting, okay? You don't want the PPT to really be where they're kind of regurgitating and summarizing the goals and objectives, the evaluations and assessments. Rather, the tone of the PPT meeting should really be, okay, I've read everything. Now, how are we going to plan? What are your recommendations moving forward to build your findings into the IEP? So the guidance that we just got regarding remote distance learning PPT guidance isn't really adding anything that parents already had when schools were in session. It's important that the district, that the state is acknowledging that you have that right, but certainly parents should absolutely be asking for the draft goals and objectives in advance of the PPT, so you as a parent could be a more collaborative member and informed of what the district's proposal is regarding your child's IEP. Back to you, Jen.
Well, I've got one more thing to add. The state takes a extremely broad view of what confidentiality is. The operative law is FERPA, the Family Educational Record Privacy Act, which protects records, documents that are produced that have your student as identifiable. It does not protect the identity of students. And this is and the right to privacy runs to the parents. It doesn't run to the school district. We're now seeing a situation where school districts are using inflated claims off of FERPA to deny parents the rights to information, which is a perversion of the law.
Okay, I think we're at, that was the last, here we go. Thank you for that slideshow, Jeff.
Yes,
Yes.
thanks, Jeff.
We hope
Get
you
it back on the screen. There we go.
Show debut.
I know. This is our first slideshow on Seek this week.
We're getting
Have
fancy.
slides up on the website later tonight or tomorrow.
Yes, we will have the slide. We will have the state's update, a link to the state's update. We will have our response, our big 4-page response, and then we'll have the slideshow. So you have all 3 documents that you'll be able to take a look at, and so you can see exactly what happened within this last week, since last Friday. I want to go into, I appreciate that, by the way. I think that was really helpful for parents to, again, just breaking it down. What did they say? What are we saying? You know, and where we'd like to go with a lot of this, because parents are asking us lots and lots of questions. And here we go. Let's go with some of the questions we got on seekthisweek@gmail.com. Our first one is for Jeff, and it's from Tammy. During COVID, I've been able to see my son's instruction, which is eye-opening. Being reasonable, thank you, Tammy, for being reasonable, I've implemented what my child needs without going to IEP every time I change something, and fortunately, he's making remarkable progress. Well, that is all very good. How do I document the data that he's making progress with me? Because I'm using things like Chrome extensions, Snap and Read, and other assistive technology that the district doesn't offer. The school has embraced my ideas and it's working great, but I worry they won't keep up with what I'm doing. I am keeping a daily diary of what I'm doing, but I'm not necessarily communicating everything right now.
Sure. Great question, Tammy. First, I want to commend you on a couple things. First, for being reasonable, for being collaborative, and also commending you on helping your child advance and make progress during this time. As we know, there are some children that this is doing well for, and there are some children that this is, just not working well for. On a personal note, I kind of had that day today with my son. It just didn't work too well today for him. So to your question, okay, we have a data collection sheet, and it sounds like you're taking a diary, which is fantastic. You want to memorialize your findings and your progress so that it is shared with your school team. Some ways in which you want to share that is by putting your initials next to the assignments that your child completed with the interventions or the technology that you helped to use during your child's education. So the school team knows that the technology that you're providing came from your side. And how can you do that? I would probably put your initials in his assignments or in his work when it's being completed. If your child's a boy, I'm not sure. Now, if there is technology that is resonating well with your child, Tammy, that is not part of an accommodation on your child's IEP, then you may also want to request that technology as an accommodation, or even go a step further and request that your child get an AT, an assistive technology consultation, or a full-blown assistive technology evaluation to determine what further accommodations can better inform your child to excel at the level that your child is under your technology, software. Okay. But it sounds like you're doing a great job. I would make sure, to summarize, I'd really make sure that your school team knows what technology you are implementing at home, and request that technology be part of an accommodation on your child's IEP. Back to you, Babs.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. And yeah, well done, Tammy. Seems like you're doing so many things right. That's wonderful to hear. Our next question is for Andy. Andy, this is from Rob. We had a PPT end of April to discuss a pragmatic language evaluation that was administered prior to distance learning. At the PPD, we brought up our concern that our child's direct instruction has been cut over 90% since distance learning has begun. The director of special ed told us, quote, "The state of Connecticut has provided guidance to not use PPT meetings to discuss distance learning because it takes away from teachers providing services," end quote. They wrote that in the IEP document summary that was sent to us after the meeting. Question for you, is this accurate? And you have to unmute yourself. You're muted. There you go.
It is an accurate statement of what the state's guidance said. It is not an accurate statement of the law in our view. Now, that's only going to get resolved at some point in the future through some form of litigation, either with a hearing officer or with a judge. We're absolutely certain that that case is going to come up at some point. But as Jen said earlier, state guidance does serve as a safe harbor for school districts by following it. And here the guidance does indeed say what your special ed director said. And it's hard to see how they're going to be liable for violating the law in that case. Although it does seem to me that at the end of the period, we're going to be looking at the present levels of performance of your daughter. And And if those show a serious regression, as they're likely to do so with this cut in services, then the level of services that you should be getting going forward should be substantially higher than the level of services that were provided prior to the closure.
Andy, can I just ask a question? Because, you know, the average parent isn't in a position to go to a hearing over an issue like that. Are there any other options?
Keep on pressing it, I think. You know, there are state complaints, but the state's already issued this guidance.
Or continue to put your concern on the record under
Absolutely.
parent input and concerns?
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think everyone, we hope, understands part of the reason we spend so much time at SEEK providing our position and communicating with the Bureau and with the state and the commissioner and everyone that will listen to us, and we appreciate it, is because we're trying to avoid people having to litigate. We don't want that. We want families and districts to find a way, especially now, to communicate with each other about what's in the students' best interests and to move forward on this. It's not any of our hope that we're going to find ourselves in a flurry of litigation. And so we're continuing to provide our response where we feel that the guidance runs afoul of federal law.
That's great, Jen.
Another option, which is likely to lead to conflict, of course, is that you retain somebody to provide the level of services or some of the level of services that were in the IEP, send a letter to the district saying this is a partial unilateral placement, as it's called, and ask for reimbursement. I doubt they're going to voluntarily pay, but at least that sets it up where you have a claim against them. And the most important thing is that you're getting the services your daughter needs right now.
Great. All right. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Jen. Now, our next question is for Jen. This is from Christina. My son was outplaced for 3 years, a unanimous decision between family and the district. Part of the reason was outplaced is because an independent educational consultant hired by the district found he needed full day, full year programming. For the past 4 years, he had full day ESY totaled about 174 hours. Back in public school now, but our district agreed to service at the same level as the outplacement. Part of this meant agreeing to outside consults and providers. District is now offering 60 hours of ESY, when previously he averaged over 162 hours per year for the last 5 years. And given severity, nature of disability has not changed, and they agreed to uphold the needs outlined in his IEP from his outplacement, I just don't see how they can even offer just 60 hours as it would be sufficient.
So much of the answer, I sound like such a lawyer, it depends. So much of the answer to this question depends on whether ESY is going to be school-based this summer, or if it is going to be distance learning this summer. Or not. And the reason for that is, again, the standard of the maximum extent possible to provide FAPE is different than if schools reopened, in which case they would be obligated to just be providing what the IEP called for. It would be a non-issue. I think where you are is the question is going to be whether or not that the hours that they're offering are the maximum extent possible for them to comply with their obligations to offer free, appropriate public education, and then again, whether schools open. So you're going to be one of those parents that's going to, I'm sure, eagerly be awaiting the guidance from the state about extended school year and the decision from the governor about whether or not schools are going to reopen the rest of this year and into the summer. It is not such an easy question. A lot of it also depends on what the IEP says. It wasn't entirely clear to us from this question whether the unanimous decision occurred through the IEP process, or that unanimous decision occurred, as sometimes happens, through a settlement agreement between the parents and the school district, in which case there would be very strict parameters of the contract in that situation. If it's through the IEP, then theoretically, if school reopens for the summer, your child should be entitled to what was agreed upon as part of the extended school year services. But if it's still going to be distance learning, and we prefer that term to the term educational opportunity, which we have seen all over the guidance and frankly feels very much like a watered down standard of appropriateness for our students. If in fact schools are going to be closed again, we may be back to the essential question that we have during the school year, which is it FAPE to the maximum extent possible?
No, Jen, and I'll just add, it relates to this question and back to my extended school year question, is it's always a good thing, if parents aren't aware of it, to Google Connecticut Extended School Year Services topic brief. It's a great document that guides you through understanding, how one qualifies for extended school year services.
And as on the issue of the length of the closure, we have reason to believe that the announcement is going to be made Monday morning. That's just a heads up. I don't know if that's in fact the case, but the tea leaves are reading that way. And it is, my guess would be that the current date of closure runs until May 20th. My guess would be that it will be extended through the school year, but stay tuned.
All right, our next question is for Julie. Julie, this is from Victor. Victor says, we are having trouble with writing goals for our child's IEP. The goals seem to be vaguely stated. We've already requested parent training. Good for you, Victor. Please remember, request parent training. Everybody out there, you're right to do that. We've already requested parent training. Where can I find a reliable resource to learn how to appropriately write out IEP goals? Is there a way to phrase them to indicate that it's mastered at school and at home? And also about measuring goals, what does it mean, for example, 80% accuracy across 3 consecutive sessions?
Okay, well, let me break that down because there's a lot of questions in there. Hopefully you can see my screen share. Everybody see that? Okay, fantastic. This is actually what I've put up here is the standard IEP goal and objective page from our current Connecticut IEP form. Let's start off with the question about, is there a resource where you can learn how to write really great goals? Again, get out your Google fingers and Google SMART IEP goals. That's capital SMART. There are different, depending on the website that you go to, there are different words that stand for the SMART, but for example, one such SMART website is the S is for specific, M is for measurable, A is attainable, R is relevant, and T is time-based. So if you Google that, there's some really, really great resources that help you learn how to write a really great IEP goal. But let me even make it simpler for you. When you look at an IEP goal, if you don't understand exactly what skill your child is going to have in 1 year's time and how you're going to measure that and know that the child has the skill, that is probably a goal that needs improvement in how it's written, okay? So I wanted to just put this up for you because you will see here, okay, in the lower left-hand side, you'll see that there are evaluation procedures, okay? In the lower right-hand side, you'll see performance criteria. Now look up where it says, objective 1, objective 2, objective 3. And of course, at the goal at the top, you'll see that however it's written, the team has to put in what is the evaluation procedure, what is the performance criteria, okay? And here's the thing. Let's go to evaluation procedure being 1, the first thing that we're talking about. I'm oftentimes it will say staff observation. I'm not a big fan of staff observation on its own because that means that you're relying on, not that we want to distrust the staff who's observing it, but other than their eyes observing it, there's no documentation of what that actually means. Depending on the goal, you want to, let's look at the first one. Is the evaluation procedure that there's a curriculum-based assessment? Is there a pre and post standardized assessment? Is there pre and post line data? So understand what some of these evaluation procedures mean. You can ask your team to explain it to you and to have a really healthy discussion about which one you should choose based on the individuality of the goal. And then, of course, we have the performance criteria. Well, how do you know in a year's time, what performance are you looking for? Is it a percentage of change over the quarterly progress monitoring? Is it months of growth? Is it a passing grade? Is it frequency trials? You know, and part of your question, Victor, was, well, what does it mean to have 80% accuracy across 3 consecutive sessions? Well, essentially what that means is when the child is being taught something and they're working on that actual objective over 3 separate times, is an 80% accuracy reached? But for me begs the question, well, where did you start? Did you start at 20% accuracy? Did you start at 30% accuracy? So to me, that's only half of the picture. You need to know where you're actually starting at the beginning of the year to understand how impressive 80% accuracy might be, because your baseline at the beginning of the year could have been 75% accuracy. And then perhaps 80% at the end of a school year may not be as ambitious as you would like it to be. Let me just break down some of the other things in this, this question. I address SMART goals. Oh, is there a way to phrase goals to indicate that it's mastered at school and at home? So basically what you're asking here is for a generalization goal, right? And typically, depending, school districts are not in a position where they can be in your home to see if something's generalized, but you can talk to your team about how do we capture whether or not your child is taking what he's learning and applying it in the home setting. You could call that a generalization program, okay? Typically in school, where you're going to see generalization is across all settings within the school, in the school building, or, you know, whether it's during transportation or at recess or whatever. So do talk to your team about what's called a generalization program. Also measure, I think I've answered everything in this. But I do hope you'll find the SMART goals a really great resource. And once again, to me, this is where the devil is in the details. If you can't look at it and it doesn't scream to you what skill your child is going to have in a year's time, and you know exactly how you're measuring it, then that's a goal you need to hit the reset button and rewrite it. Anybody else have any comments here?
I think you got it, Julie. You
Okay.
nailed it. You need
Oh,
to
let me
stop
stop
sharing.
screen sharing.
Yes, so you can see the rest of our faces.
I will do that. I will stop screen sharing. Give me 1 second. Oh, Julie, come on. All righty, what are we doing here?
Ah,
Here we are. Nice job.
congratulations.
All right.
Sorry.
That's all right. It's great. I will tell, just a reminder for everybody out there. Listen, I know and I adore these people, but they are lawyers and they like to talk and they like to use certain words. We record this for a reason. So it is on our Facebook. You can always find it on our Facebook page. Rewatch some of this. Send us questions. If there's anything that, you know, flew by too quickly, please reach out to us. We love to talk to you. So, but thank you guys so much for answering these questions. Just a reminder out there, we are having 2 events next week. We have another Seek This Week, of course, every Thursday night, appointment viewing, 7 p.m. Don't forget, we'll be answering questions. Keep sending them to seekthisweek@gmail.com. And we are going to have our post-pandemic equity in education roundtable webinar. Whew, that's a lot to say. So it's next Friday, not tomorrow, a week from tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. So far, we have Connecticut's Commissioner of Education, Dr. Cardona. We have Tiffany Jackson, Director of Student Services in New Haven, Ann Smith, Executive Director of African Caribbean American Parents of Children with Disabilities, Sarah Egan from the Office of the Child Advocate. That's just for starters. By tomorrow, who knows? But keep stay tuned for exactly how you can sign up for this webinar and who the whole cast is going to be. It's going to be a wonderful conversation. Another reminder to check out our website, seekct.com. Again, let us know you're out there, sign up so you can get information from us. And just a gentle reminder, we are a nonprofit. We do really appreciate donations in order to fund our operating costs, things like webinar software, things expenses that seem to come up while we're trying to advocate for you and in Hartford as well.
Babs, if I could, Barb,
Yes.
if I could just say,
Yes,
if you
Julie.
didn't mention it before, because I'm the person who does the website, I tried to put the donate button on the school closure page today and I failed miserably, but it is at the bottom of the homepage.
Yes, and it works.
And I will fix that.
Yes, it's totally, thank you, Julie. And so now is the time that we try to, we've been talking to you for an hour. This is our takeaway moment. So everyone is going to go around, round robin, and give us what is the takeaway you want to have for this week? If nothing else, this is what we want you to remember. We know this has been a deep week. So Jen, you want to give us a start?
I'll go first. So I really loathe certain phrases that become popular in society, things like thinking outside the box or teachable moment. I hate them. I just do. However, I do think that one thing I've noticed during this time period is, for years, I've been doing this a very long time. And there's a culture in public schools, and that culture sometimes is, and not always, but that culture sometimes is that the answer to the question is, the question, why are you doing it this way, is because we've always done it this way. And what's really wonderful about the fact that everyone's having to innovate is I have seen some really creative uses of resources on the part of special ed directors and administrators, because they have these staff who they are paying, who aren't able to provide services in the traditional way that we envision. And they've been really thoughtful and clever about how to use those resources in different ways. And for some of our kids, some of the students that we work with, they're blossoming during this time period. And I want to make sure that we mention that, because there's been a lot of people out there doing a lot of hard work. And maybe when we go back to school and life hopefully resumes to something like it was before, we will have all sorts of new ideas about how to do things, because it's not like anything we've ever done before.
True. Jeff, what's your takeaway?
Yeah, so I actually have two takeaways this week. All right. The first one is, it's really critical during this school closure time that parents document and communicate what is working and what is not working. Okay. I had the perfect example today with my youngest son, right? There are some things that are just not going to work, and there are some things that are going to work. And you need to empower yourself as a parent to share this information proactively with your school team. So document and communicate what is working and what is not working. The second thing is, the larger picture is, I don't think we're ever going to go back to the way it was, right? We're going to have potentially another school closure this fall or winter. And we touched on the subject in tonight's program about having a appendix form to your child's IEP, where you're going to list services, service hours, consultation support while your child's in school, which is your traditional IEP, but also what your child needs during a interim school closure period. And I really want to invite parents to think about that, because if you were to have, an anecdotal conversation with your friend about the services that your child is receiving in school during their IEP versus what they're receiving now, is that actually memorialized somewhere? And if it's not, it needs to be. And we're inviting our partners at the state to develop that appendix. We certainly have ideas and would work with them to do that. So those are my two takeaways for tonight.
Great. Julie.
Okay, so my takeaway is I'm sort of juxtaposing the first week we came to you, and what are we now in our fourth week, bringing these shows to you. And, you know, we started off really with this whole reasonableness approach, which we all think we need to continue to be reasonable. However, we're now weeks and weeks into this, and it's not that we want to seem insensitive to people who are working in school districts. I have friends who are teachers. I have relatives who are teachers. We don't want to seem insensitive, but we are putting our foot a little bit more on the gas and saying we do need to increase the standard of what you should be expecting for your child's individualized education program. And I'm just thinking back on where we were and where we are now. And yes, we need to continue to be sensitive to everyone's needs, but it's time to, I guess for the lack of a better word, pump up the gas.
Okay, Andy, you need to unmute yourself, sir.
Might be better for everybody if I didn't unmute.
I was just thinking a lot of people probably wish they had an Andy mute button.
So, education in Connecticut was nothing great before this closure. There are lots of problems. We all know about lots of those problems. Now, there are the whole group of people out there, not parents, not advocates, a group of other people who are looking at this period of closure as the entry point to a new system of education, to changes in the education system. Now, the changes they want may not be the changes you want. For example, the notion that distance learning is now up and running would be a great way to save money if you run school 3 days a week. Now, you as parents probably don't like that idea very much. So it seems to me that it is time for all of us to be thinking about what we want education to look like in the future and not be looking to go back to where we were, because I can assure you that's not going to happen. We have something of a clean slate now, and let's design an education program that actually works, something that I submit we haven't had for a long time.
Great. Thank you, Andy. All right, I want to thank everyone on the panel, of course, and especially Jerry Fleming, our chat moderator. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for Seek This Week. Again, we are here for you. We look forward to hearing from you, and we'll have much more information about the webinar and next week's show coming up soon. So thank you very much. Good night. Take care.
Thank you.
Stay well.
Stay
Good
well.
night or goodbye.